every time you travel the country, how many different types of police car do you see? How many different uniforms do you see?
Yeah.
And if you bothered to go into any of the police stations, and how many different types of police station do you see? But every one you went into would have a different IT system doing a different job for a different purpose. So
it is crackers when you think about it, isn't it?
It's basically a Victorian
system. What a
system
waste.
In the 21st century.
Yeah.
How much money could you save if we were doing all of that collectively together?
The most senior police officer in the country isn't happy. Why? Well, there's a few reasons. Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley says police officers are being used as social workers rather than law enforcers. He's calling for a major overhaul of the way police forces operate. So today we're asking, should police really be doing the work of social workers? What exactly is the role of a police officer in Britain in 2025? Is the police service fit for purpose? And if it is to change, then what would that look like? Welcome to the Crime Agents. Well, hello and welcome back to the Crime Agents with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And I'm the ex-cop Neil Basu.
Now, make sure you're listening to us on Global Play, and you can watch all of our full episodes on YouTube as well.
And if you're not following us on socials, where have you been for the last 10 years or so? We're at the Crime Agents on all platforms.
Social media, look at you.
I know, I'm learning all about it.
You sound like you got the sniffles there, Neil. Am I right in thinking that?
Well, thank you for noticing. That makes you more sympathetic than Nina. As she was getting up at 5:20 to go and save the world, she said, that sounds like you might have just a touch of man flu there.
Yeah.
And I had to remind her she's a doctor of criminology, not a doctor of medicine.
And Nina is your wife, of course.
Yes, and she gave me the look you've just given me and said, get off your arse and go and earn some money by chit-chatting to Andy. So here I am.
Right, well, let's get into it. So this was a really punchy article by Sir Mark Rowley in the Sunday Times. I mean, the headline reads, "Police exist to protect the public. We are not social workers." What does he mean by that?
Well, it's interesting. I'm not sure what Mark means by that, but
really?
there is a school. Well, I think I know what he means.
I think I do.
But what I'm concerned about is that there is two schools of thought about policing.
Yeah.
One is that we're here to fight crime. You'll remember many years ago, Theresa May. I think it was might have been her first conference with the Police Federation, and she stood up to give us a hard time and said, "You lot need to remember that you're crime fighters, nothing more, nothing less."
Yeah.
Now, I've never considered myself just a crime fighter, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's the case. But HMIC FRS, our regulator, Her Majesty's Inspectorate and Constabulary, now Fire and Rescue Service as well, years ago said that only about 20% of what police officers deal with is crime. That will come as a bit of a shock to the public who think, hang on, I'm paying my taxes for 100% of crime.
Well, I think if you ask police officers now, they'll say it's way more than that. 20%.
Way more dealing with more crime than 20%.
Yeah.
Possibly, but I think they'll also say that actually a lot of their activity is diverted into non-crime incidents, which was the same when I was starting. But back in 92, we had so there are two big issues that I think Mark's talking about. He's talking about police officers' responsibility to do everybody else's social work.
Yeah.
So particularly in mental health and missing children, they're the two things that have exploded over the years as a major cause of diverting police activity. Now, so what's the argument then? Should we be doing that or not, is the argument. And I'm here to play a bit of devil's advocate. I was a police officer, I was a crime fighter, I was a detective. I joined to put bad people behind bars. I didn't join to look after the mentally ill, and I didn't join to find other people's children. That wasn't the reason I did it. But a lot of the tactics that I had to use to catch very bad people are very difficult, confrontational, covert. You need trust and confidence from the public to do that kind of work. If you don't have it, they think of you as a police state. They think of you as an enforcer and not a guardian of their safety and their peacekeeping, a sort of peacekeeping role. And the whole British policing model is based on that trust and confidence, giving us consent to do what we do. I mean, let's be honest, I think currently there's about 145,000 cops in the country.
Yeah.
There's about 70 million people. Yeah. Do you honestly think we're going to keep control of the streets if they don't have any trust and confidence? And we'll go on to talk about that.
Yeah.
And I think some of that comes from some of the work we do, which isn't about crime. It's not about confrontation. It's not about arresting people. It's not about laying hands on. It's not smacking doors in at 2:00 in the morning. And if we're not careful, because Mark is under tremendous pressure, like every chief is, around money, we cut back on everything that's not crime fighting, and then we start to lose the trust and confidence we need to do the crime fighting, to get the intelligence.
Yeah. Are you kind of talking about intelligence and relationships with the community, i.e. if a crime happens, they go asking the community what's going on. If no one trusts them, then no one's going to tell them anything.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I must have bored you about this many times, Andy. I'm sure I have. But this is the business case for having trust and confidence. It's also the business case for diversity. So I make exactly the same argument. We're policing for everybody, not just the people we like. And if you want those people to trust you and have confidence in you, they are more likely to obey the law. That's quite an important thing for society, isn't it? They're more likely to give you intelligence, which is absolutely required to solve some of these crimes. You need the community to tell you who's done it, where they're hiding, and not to hide them and to hand them over. You need them to make witness statements and actually trust in the criminal justice system and a bit of justice. So you want them to come to court. And one of the most important things for me, and you will have reported on this quite a lot, is I would sometimes like the public to wade in and help the front line when they're getting their heads kicked in on the street.
Instead of filming it, you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. The citizen journalist must drive you journalists mad. On the camera, taking a picture of it, posting it online with a snarky comment and editing it so that it looks as though police have done something wrong. I'm not saying that police don't.
I was going to say, I've seen many occasions where the police have done something wrong.
Yes, and what I want to see is the whole thing. I want to see the whole thing, and that's the balance kind of argument. But we don't have that at the moment. And without that trust and confidence, we don't get any of that. Yeah. And some of that trust and confidence is not just, some of it is built on crime performance, getting the crime figures down. Mark talked about 20% drop in neighbourhood crimes and robbery and burglary and theft in London. He got quite a hard time for that on Laura Koonsberg, I think. But, you know, he's quoting his factual statistics. I've got no reason to think he was quoting them incorrectly. That's a big transformation in where the Met has been with rising crime levels, that he's managed to have an actual effect. Now that will give him some trust and confidence, but be careful. It can't just be about fighting crime.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think because I know several police officers, obviously, and the majority of them, well, all of them want to help, and that's why they join the police. So if their instinct is to help people, and they turn up at a call and just say
I can't help you.
Well, so, yeah, exactly.
It's not
this
on the
isn't
list.
for us. This isn't for us, mate. This should be for the mental health team.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to get drawn into it, and of course they're going to be doing their best to help people. I think the criticism is around, are the other services integrated enough with the police? I think it's very clear that they're not at the moment.
I think Mark is putting pressure. This reason he's done this is to put pressure on other services to step up.
Totally.
And put pressure on the Chancellor to give those services more money to do their actual job.
Yeah, of course.
And you will have reported on, it was after my retirement, but when they did the mental health, when they changed their mental health service, that they did copying, I think, what Lee Freeman had done up in... was it Durham or Northumbria? I can't remember. But up in the northeast, he had
East
done...
Yorkshire, I think.
Where he's now HMIC, but he was previously Chief Constable up there. And he had brought in a policy where police officers were not going to deal with mental health calls unless there was an immediate threat to life. So effectively, you're going to have to deal with it, NHS, ambulance service, mental health. We're not equipped to deal with it. And Mark brought that into London. I don't know whether you reported on it, but I've not seen any derogatory comments about that. No. And that's a huge deal. I mean, we used to get into all kinds of trouble because we're not very good at dealing with people in mental health crisis, and they shouldn't be sitting in the backs of vans, and they shouldn't be sitting in custody.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I text, in preparation for this episode, I text a few officers, frontline officers that I know. And one of the questions I asked were, how, percentage-wise, how often do you come into contact who is having a mental health problem? They said, way more than half.
More than half?
That's what he says now.
I mean, that's extraordinary.
That is extraordinary, isn't it?
It is. When I started, I was at Battersea, and we had Springfield Hospital in Tooting just down the road. It's a major community mental health hospital. And about what we call our CAD, a computer-aided dispatch system, is how we get all the calls in from the public and assign us to the calls. The CAD system would say about 5% or less were mental health calls.
Really?
That was in 1992. I was commander of South East London in 2012, and one of my boroughs was Croydon. And Croydon has one of the largest mental health hospitals in Europe on its patch.
Yes.
And their CAD system, so the number of calls they were dealing with mental health crisis, was 40%
Well, there you go.
in 2012. So I'm actually not surprised 10 years later they're saying it's now over half.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole different
this
podcast
is the thing.
on
It's
mental
like,
health in society.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but it's like, how on earth are the police meant to deal with that? Because they're not trained, are they? They're not trained in mental health.
No. Well, they have very short, like everything in policing, because you have to know so much about so many things. I mean, this will make some of our listeners laugh, I'm sure, and some of our critics roar with laughter, but it's actually one of the most complicated jobs in the world. Think how many pieces of legislation and that you have to distill and then think about making a split-second decision. So if you want to know how to police under the Mental Health Act, yes, there's training for that. Does that teach you the skills of a mental health nurse that spent 10 years training to be that person? Of course it doesn't.
It doesn't even scratch the surface.
No, and it's dangerous to put police officers in that position, particularly young police officers who might be terrified or might be stereotyping mentally ill people as potentially violent. It's actually relatively rare, but they don't necessarily know that. They don't know how someone's going to flip. You know, at the very severe end of mental health crisis, the sort of paranoid schizophrenic, yes, we've seen some horrendous examples of the violence that they can produce, and some very seriously injured police officers, and the death of that poor 14-year-old schoolboy is an example of psychosis at the extreme end, but that's rare. Most people are just vulnerable and needing help.
I mean, let me tell you a story. I was out with the firearms unit once, and a call came in, and they had reports of a guy with a samurai sword looking very menacing and starting.
Why are we still selling those?
Well, exactly. I mean, they're legal, aren't they? But that's, again, another podcast in itself. So anyway, they got there, and this guy was just clearly just having a breakdown. He was smashing windscreens on cars. And pretty quickly, the officers realised that this isn't a guy who's a real danger to the public. He might be a danger to cars, but he's not a danger to the public. So one of the officers, he talked him down. And within minutes, this guy started crying, and he explained how he'd just lost his mother, and his mother was a rock to him, and he was, I think, abused as a boy by his father. So he was just having a clear mental health breakdown. Now, it was very fortunate that this officer realised this straight away, talked him down. But the point I'm
What a
making,
brilliant officer.
What a great officer, and he is. But the point I'm making is, for the next hour and a half, the firearms unit were there with him, just waiting for the mental health services to arrive, or health services. That's an hour and a half time of a firearms unit whose responsibility it is to deal with the most serious crime in the capital. Yeah. And they're sitting, basically just helping this guy,
so
who should be helped by other services.
Yeah,
that's what Sir Mark Rowley means when he talks about, we must be focused and shed the distractions. That is the distraction he's talking about.
And my only concern about that, I'm not saying he's wrong, but I am playing devil's advocate. I'm saying he's right, that the public, that's not what the public expect police officers to be doing. But the minute you take all of that away, and all you ever see is police officers arresting people, I'm concerned that will take away some of the trust and confidence, but I'm not disagreeing with him. What you've just described is a classic example of a massive diversion of cost and resources that might be saving a life somewhere else, that isn't required for that kind of incident. What a fantastic incident that was to describe, though, about the skill of a normal police officer who isn't trained in negotiation and influence, which is a very long, very demanding, very high failure rate course that we use for kidnap negotiators. He's just somebody who knows how to speak to people, particularly people at the worst moments of their lives. And I always used to think that, my job was not just about looking at bad people. It was helping people who were incredibly vulnerable at the worst points of their lives. I'm nervous that which was my purpose for being in the job for 30 years, would suddenly be eradicated, and I would have to think of myself as RoboCop. Okay, RoboCop with arthritis.
You look a bit like RoboCop.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you, Andy. There's an extra pint for you later.
And in this article, going back to it, he's saying policing also continues to pick up unsustainable levels of demand of other public services. Children's care homes, for example, including expensively funded private ones, draw heavily on police time. He's saying that on more than 80,000 occasions last year, vulnerable children went missing from care homes and exploited by gangs. Not only does this absorb thousands of officers' hours, it cannot be right, financially or morally, that often the only place for vulnerable children to be held is a police building. Now, this is clearly what the crux of the matter, isn't it? He's saying, why aren't councils doing more?
He's right about that. So that 80,000 figure, I'm a really experienced police officer, and I nearly fell off my chair. I thought, is he talking about... Largely because I thought he was talking about London. I'm wondering whether that's the national figure. It might be the London figure. And if it is,
it's London.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? Across 32 boroughs in London. But I think it's the national figure. But just think how long it takes. I have tracked down many missing children in my time. When they're particularly vulnerable, it tends to be a detective's responsibility. So the late-turned detective sergeant, who's supposed to be dealing with serious crime, has got to put a plan together to do a manhunt on a child who might be vulnerable. So again, just like your firearms example, you are basically being dragged away from your entire caseload, and I used to have between 20 and 30 serious crime cases, to go and find somebody else's kid.
Yeah.
And when I say somebody else's kid, they might not always have a parent or a guardian, but they will have a care home, a social worker, other people who are responsible for that child, who have let them routinely escape. And mostly, and we get terribly jaded by that and that's really dangerous, because we know they're the most at-risk group. We know they're most likely to be exploited by gangs, used for county lines, child sexual exploitation, get into addiction, get into seeing things that no young kid should see. It's a terrible thing.
It is, isn't it?
And
I think we kind of gloss over this sometimes. But if you actually think about all those things that you've just mentioned, it's these police officers who have to actually deal with this.
Yeah.
And surely that must affect the police officers themselves as well. There's some research being done into this. A normal person puts up with or experiences about 5 traumas in their life. A frontline police officer can experience up to 500. So, yes, we're talking about the vulnerability of the people that they're caring for, but surely it must affect the officers themselves. Yeah. If they're on the front line dealing with trauma after trauma after trauma, how does that affect you?
So I want us to come back and revisit this at some point in the future with some proper experts who will tell you some horror stories about what happens to cops. So, I sit as a trustee on the one national charity for policing called Police Care UK.
Yeah.
And over the last 5 years, 85% of our calls have been about mental health, not physical distress.
Yeah.
That is a massive jump in mental health conditions in cops.
It's huge.
And in 2018, a friend of mine called Dr. Jess Miller, she did a brilliant research study called The Job, The Life. And 13,000 police officers answered that survey. And we worked out that about 1 in 5 of them were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and a significant percentage of those were suffering from complex PTSD. I mean, that's life-changing potentially forever.
Do you think the public realises this, the effect it has?
I don't think a lot of police officers realise it.
No,
it's still stigmatised. You speak to a lot of cops, I speak to a lot of cops. I'm always very clear about saying I had counselling for a year after I retired, and it's incredibly important to recognise what the job itself does to you as a human being.
Why did you wait till after you retired
to seek that? I didn't practice what I preached. So I told people, I tried to make it a normalised process to get help in your job. But it's very interesting that the more senior you get, the less likely you are to ask for help.
Of course.
I think you feel very exposed as a leader to say, I'm not coping well with this.
Right, yeah.
But I'm very much aware, and if we had the National Police Chiefs Council chair here or the head of the Police Superintendents Association, they would tell you some frightening statistics to how many of our senior officers, not just because they've experienced all of this trauma because they were frontline officers once, but then they've got into managerial roles and they are dealing with their officers who are suffering, not knowing what to do. They're dealing with all the executive pressure of having no money, which is why Mark is out making the case for all policing, as he should do as the most senior cop, that we need more money, and making the case for the fact that actually police officers need to be doing police roles. And a lot of the job's traumatic enough as it is without giving us all this additional burden that we're not trained to do. And on that, I'm not playing devil's advocate anymore. I'm saying, well done, Mark, for saying it. I thought you were excellent on Laura Koonsberg. I thought you made the point very well. People have to start to listen that policing is only part of a community safety system. It is not the community safety system.
And just finally on this, I mean, this is really punchy stuff from the Commissioner. This suggests to me that he has total buy-in from the Home Secretary and they are singing from the same hymn sheet. Do you think that's right?
I think that's absolutely right. I know them both. There is no way. I mean, I was Mark's deputy for years. I mean, Mark being punchy is not a new thing. So, but good for him. But I
wonder what he's like behind closed doors if he's like this in public.
He's also got very strong political acumen, and he knows when and where to push. Now, there is no way in my history in policing, and I was often fighting for a £1 billion budget, much bigger than most chief constables as the head of counter-terrorism. You don't go and argue that in public. You don't go and frighten the public, frighten politicians through the power of the press to say we can't cope, we can't deal with that threat. You don't do that unless you have the backing of the Home Secretary. If you do that without the backing of the Home Secretary, you're going to get into tremendous trouble.
Well, you'll talk yourself out of a job, I imagine.
Well, quite possibly. But also, this was very clearly aimed at the Chancellor. And I think we've all read, and your journalist colleagues in politics will be telling you, the tension probably between the Home Office and the Exchequer on this very issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what it says to me, which I'm really, really pleased about? And I'm really upset that I'm no longer a chief officer, because for the first time in my history that I can remember, well, certainly as a chief, and I was a chief for over 10 years, is a relationship that looks like a partnership between senior politicians and senior cops. Because he wasn't the only one. Remember the letter they wrote to the Home Secretary?
Yeah, to all the police chiefs.
Which was six of the most senior police chiefs in the country.
A conspiracy theorist might suggest that they're all colluding along with the Home Secretary to, put pressure on the Chancellor.
You call it collusion, I call it partnership.
Right, listen. In this article, Sir Mark Rowley is also calling for huge reform in the police, and we're going to be looking into that after the break. So it's not every day that the most senior police officer in the country calls for the most radical reform the police service has ever seen. Now, just going back to this article, Neil, he said that no one would design modern policing the way it currently is. He says multiple national bodies create waste and confusion. He's suggesting the 43 forces, some come close to falling over as they're too small to operate, and they're all knitted together by a collection of complex collaboration agreements. He's saying that investment in modern technology is being deprioritised in favour of keeping officer numbers high. This is making it harder to keep pace with modern criminals. What do you think?
Well, I'm not going to play devil's advocate on this one, because I think he is 100% right. And this, unlike our previous conversation...
You're agreeing with him quite a lot today, Neil.
I know. He'll be horrified.
Your old mate.
He'll be horrified. No, he won't. I was going to say something about trust and confidence. We may get back to that, just so that Mark will know that I am actually, here to hold him to account as well.
Well, yeah, that's it.
But on this is very different from my 30 years in policing, because for 30 years, no chief would have been talking like this, because it would have been like turkeys voting for Christmas. It's okay for Mark. He's halfway through his contract, a bit over halfway. This won't happen in this parliament, and therefore he'll be like me, retired, being a bit of an armchair detective, when he's finished, when this is all being sorted out. But he's right to raise it now. And in the past, the one thing that has stopped what he's asking for, which is the merger of way too many police forces, a bit of economies of scale, let's save some money and let's put that into the front line where people want it. The one thing that stopped that, well, two things that stopped that: chief constables, who want a job and therefore they don't want 12 to 15 forces, and I think that's the wrong number, by the way. They want the 43 because that's part of your career progression.
Yeah, he's saying that instead of 43 forces the way it is now, he's saying around 12. I mean, I was astonished when I saw that. I was like, 12 forces?
I would have said,
how's that going to work? I mean,
well, I'd have said
they're
9.
Basically merging with 9.
Yeah.
You think even less?
Yeah. And I know even less can work.
Have you worked that one out then?
Well, there's my old banking colleagues from 35 years ago going, don't ask him that because he doesn't know anything about maths. So what I would say is this: when I ran counter-terrorism, we had 9 counter-terrorism units in the country.
Oh, I see.
One of which was London.
Yeah.
And the London region could be London, City of London and British Transport Police. That's an argument for another day.
Yeah.
But the other 8 regions, they were regions made up of 5 or 6, or in one case, 7 chief constables.
Yeah, just explain a bit more how it works, because you've got the North East Counter-Terrorism Unit, you've got the North West Counter-Terrorism Unit. What ground does that cover?
Well, that the North West you'd have Manchester, Merseyside, Lancashire, Cheshire, and there's the Northwest geography, Cumbria. So you've got that as a collective. In the Northeast, you'll have obviously the West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire area,
God's country,
huge.
Northeast,
North Yorkshire. You've got Northumbria, you've got Durham.
Yeah.
West Midlands, you'll have West Midlands Police itself. You've got Staffordshire. You've got West Mercia. You've got so these are huge geographic areas that are covered by anywhere between 5 to 7 chief constables.
And what does that do? Does that make it more straightforward for you? Tell me how that benefits you, having less forces.
Do I have to? And it's, for instance, I was the Home Secretary and not the head of counter-terrorism policing. How many chief constables do I want to deal with at any one time?
Yeah.
I don't want to have to deal. When I was doing counter-terrorism, I didn't want to deal with all 43. Okay. I would go and see them once every 3 months and give them an update on counter-terrorism.
Right.
But once a month, I would have a National Police Coordination Committee.
Right.
Those areas would elect a chief from their area. It's usually the chief of the biggest force who's providing the most number of people for the counter-terrorism unit. And that chief would come to that committee and make those decisions. Why can't all of policing run like that? So I say you'd have 9 regional directors of policing. Yeah. Those 9 regional directors would be the equivalent of National Police Chiefs Council now. Oh, right. They'd be the equivalent of the College of Policing.
So not actually police officers themselves?
I don't see why they shouldn't be police officers. Yeah. I mean, I think they should still have that. But at the moment, you've got this crazy situation. Think of running a business where you've got 43 police forces in England and Wales, including the Met. You've got a police force in Scotland, a police force in Northern Ireland. You've got 3 non-Home Office police forces. You've got British Transport Police. You've got Ministry of Defence Police, and you've got the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. They've all got their own chief constable.
It's a lot, isn't it? It's all.
Well, it's worse than that because
I'm falling asleep just listening to you reel off all these bloody forces.
Guy is sitting there going, "Listen, I'm going to start snoring." But they are.
Guy's our wonderful producer, by the way.
Yes, those chief constables are all independent legal entities, corporations sole. They're operationally independent. They can do what they like. So they've all got their own. If you run a business, you can have your own HR department, your own IT department, your own procurement department, your own fleet, your own estates. Every single, and this is what Mark was talking about when he said there's a load of spaghetti in the background, which is costing us an absolute fortune. Can you imagine if you simplified all of that?
So would that mean fewer police officers?
Not necessarily, because you'd be releasing hundreds of millions of pounds. In fact, the Police Foundation with Michael Barber said potentially up to £800 million, which would pay for an awful lot of cops.
And I tell you what, chief constables, they don't come cheap. So that's a lot of money that could go towards frontline policing, whatever policing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Modern technology, as Sir Mark Rowley is talking about.
Absolutely. But I mean, my view is, what does the citizen actually care about? Like, what do you care about as a citizen? I mean, I would suggest it's probably the bobby on the beat and the guy in the car that's turning up to your 999 call. You don't really care about people like me. Yeah. And we used to laugh that unless you were the local Safer Neighbourhood team Bobby, or you were the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, everyone else in between was sort of dispensable. Yeah. They're the people you really care about and want to hear from. You need more investment in that frontline officer.
Sure. That's old school, that, isn't it? It's like, it seems to me that there's 2 places that Sir Mark Rowley and the Home Office want serious investment in, and that is, as you say, more bobbies on the beat, but also in modern technology. Those are the 2 areas that are crying out for help, right?
Well, look, you and I, particularly in your job as a journalist, and me in my fantastic job of basically just enjoying myself in my semi-retirement, travel the length and breadth of the country. Every time you travel the country, how many different types of police car do you see? How many different uniforms do you see?
Yeah.
And if you bother to go into any of the police stations, and how many different types of police station do you see? But everyone you went into would have a different IT system doing a different job for a different purpose. So
it is crackers when you think about it, isn't it?
It's basically a Victorian system.
What a waste.
In the 21st century.
Yeah.
How much money could you save if we were doing all of that collectively together?
Well, he says in his article, the 43 force model was designed in the 1960s and hasn't been fit for purpose for at least 2 decades.
And the only thing I disagreed with him there was when he said 2 decades. It's been longer than that.
I was going to say.
So, and the reality is, as I said, it was chief constables who stopped this in the past. The one thing that's new is that chief constables are actually saying we need to do this. Some of us are so small, we're going out of business. We can't run anymore. So you've actually got chief constables on the right page. I've got a bit of credibility here because I've been asked when Labour were in opposition. I was one of the advisors on roundtables for their law and order policy. Mm-hmm. So I've already spoken to Yvette and to Sarah Brown and other people in the administration on the policing side about what I think should be the correct way to reform policing. And I sit as a senior fellow on the Police Foundation and on a company called Crest Advisory. They're both political think tanks. They're both very embedded with the government now. So I think if you look at what they've said in the past about reform, particularly the Police Foundation work, you'll understand where Labour might be going with this.
So in those discussions that you had with the now Home Secretary, how many of those policies and issues has she put in place?
Not many yet.
Well, there you go.
But what did come from that was the emphasis on the missions. So and those
which were?
Well, you've got the serious youth violence, you've got the neighbourhood policing mission, and you've got putting more officers on the streets. Now look at what those missions are in terms of crime fighting, and none of them are free. And this is what Mark's talking about. If Labour want to deliver the missions they wanted to deliver and the things they took advice on and thought these would be sensible, this is what the public really want to see, you're going to need to pay for them. And what the government is doing is what the governments always do is, okay, we'll pay a little bit, but police, you're going to have to find the rest of the money.
We'll pay a little bit and want a lot.
Yeah, so the police are going to have to find the rest of the money. Just like education system, the schools are going to have to find the rest of the money. They'll be given a bit of money, but they'll have to find the rest through efficiencies. Mark is offering them that way out. They've been advised on this before. It's time for them to start actually doing it. Listen,
we'll go to a break soon, Neil, but do you know what? When I hear this and read this article, the first question in my mind is this really realistic? Is this really going to happen? Or is this just a pipe dream?
It was never realistic without political support, and you've got it, I think. Without full chief constable support, and you've got it, I think. Police crime commissioners, haven't heard from them yet. Haven't heard their response to what Mark Rowley said, so that will be interesting. You've got a load of individually elected politicians in 43 areas who will probably want to say in this.
And police and crime commissioners as well.
Well, that's what I mean. Those police crime commissioners who are now elected by the public on very small margins. I have a view about police crime commissioners, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about it in the future.
I'm guessing I know what it is.
Yeah, well, they're going to vote. They're highly likely to be anti this, but if they're not, you've got all of that support around this issue, and you've got the burning platform of no money. So this is the best time in history, I think, for this to happen.
And realistically, how long would it take?
Police has got a tremendous track record of being a delivery agency. You can criticise policing as much as you like, but
a lot of bureaucracy in there, though.
I've been with an awful lot of agencies over the years, including special forces, the other emergency services, top business people. When you set police a task and you point in the right direction, they'll deliver it. It won't take a long time, and if everyone is on the same page and they get cracking now, I think you could deliver this by mid next Parliament, I think.
So in the next part of the episode, we're going to be looking back. It's the 20th anniversary of the 7/7 bombings, and we're going to be looking at the role British foreign policy played. So Neil, 20 years on from 7/7, which killed 52 and maimed hundreds more, where are we at now?
Well, Monday was that 20-year anniversary, and I think before I say anything, my heart goes out to everybody who was affected by that. There were 52 innocent people murdered that day, but there were over 750 who would have been psychologically and physically damaged for life. And we've heard a lot of those stories leading up to this anniversary, and seeing my colleagues placing the wreaths on the memorial, it's a bit of a tearjerker. I was opening a conference at Royal Holloway on Monday morning talking about this very subject, and one of the people in the audience was a survivor and bereaved veteran of the 2017 attacks. And what I said to the audience was, forget about speaking to counter-terrorism professionals like me, former and current, the most profound words come from the victims themselves, and we've seen some powerful stuff around that. But I think the most important thing from victims that I've learnt, and not just victims of terrorism and survivors of terrorism, but victims throughout my policing career, is the vast majority of them, if something has gone wrong, and let's be honest, an attack is always an intelligence failure.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of criticism about 7/7 for both policing and the security services, but particularly the security services not having spotted that two of the, particularly the ringleader, Mohammed Siddiq Khan, was on the radar but not considered a threat. And then you had the JTAC, the Joint Threat Analysis Centre, saying, we don't believe there is any group currently with the capability and the intent to attack the UK. That came out in, I think that was just a few weeks before the attack. So literally it wasn't spotted at all. And what victims and bereaved want is some sense of accountability about that, as in, are we going to admit what the failings were? And the reason they want that is they don't want it to happen to anybody again. You know, they don't want anyone to go through the suffering that they're going through. And I think learning the lessons, which is a horrible expression that people hate. We had the father of Safi Roussos at the Manchester Arena inquiry tell us Safi Roussos was the 8-year-old who was murdered at Manchester Arena. And her father basically said, my 8-year-old is not a lesson from which you get to learn. And he was absolutely right. You know, 8-year-olds shouldn't have to die for us to be better at our jobs.
Yeah, I remember that speech.
So getting this right, you know, what do we learn from these attacks? Because the trouble with the national security community is we're all always playing catch-up. We don't have this crystal ball. You know, we're not scanning the environment to look at the threat, the next threat that's coming at us.
Yeah.
We're reacting to the threat that's in front of us. And when the catastrophe happens, we are very good at picking it apart and going, we need to be better. But that's too late. That's not what the public expect.
And what's it like when you're trying to grapple with this and you know mistakes have been made, but when you make a mistake as a police officer, that could end up with someone dying?
Well, that's we talked about trauma in part 2, and one of the most traumatic things, there's a lot of traumatic things in policing, but one of them is when people die on your watch and you feel responsible for that death.
Do you actually feel responsible?
Yeah. I mean, I've written extensively about it, and there is no other way. I mean, everyone says you're way too hard on yourself, and quite often, hindsight is a wonderful forensic tool. You know, everybody with hindsight could have done something differently. And quite often, even if you'd had the hindsight, it's very difficult to stop some of these things. You know, 7/7 and Manchester Arena are two good examples of where, even if we had been on the perpetrators of those atrocities, there is no guarantee that those attacks would have been stopped. Now, saying that doesn't make you feel any less responsible for it. It just doesn't.
It's not going to make anyone feel better, that, does it?
But your job, when you're in the middle of it, and bear in mind, I remember hearing that Peter Clark had 70 operations, and he was a previous head of counter-terrorism policing. In 2003, 2005, just before 7/7, he was dealing with Operation Crevice. That's where Crevice was the plot to bring down airliners. So he was dealing with that plot, and two of the 7/7 attackers were like on the periphery of that plot. They weren't involved in that specific plot.
Yeah.
But that's why they were missed, because they were leaving for Pakistan, so they weren't leaving to attack Britain, so they were seen as a low priority. But I remember him saying at the Leveson inquiry, I've got 70 operations that I'm running. And I remember Bob Quick in 2008, 2009, also a former counter-terrorism policing head, doing my job. In that year, he had 100 operations that he was dealing with. When I retired in 2021, we had 600.
Wow.
So when you're in the midst of that, you don't have time or luxury to be thinking, you know, to hold your head in your hands saying, oh my God, I'm responsible for all of this. And you have to get on with it.
Yeah, and you guys looking at the root of the extremism as well, what do you think fueled the extremism back in 2005 compared to what we're seeing now?
Well, there was a lot of debate about what we had missed in 7/7. So if you think fundamentally this new methodology of a suicide bombing on British soil, no one had seen that before. That was something you read about in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So that was new. But probably the most shocking thing for people was that these were British kids.
Yeah, homegrown.
They were born and raised here, radicalised here, that yes, they went to Pakistan to train, where they were clearly taught how to manufacture bombs, but they were born and raised here. So what on earth made kids born and raised in Britain want to attack Britain in that horrific way?
So how were they radicalised, and who did the radicalising?
Well, you had people like, there's a very famous terrorist who was killed in a drone strike many years later called Rashid Rauf, who was one of the biggest radicalisers. I mean, obviously the most famous name everyone's heard of is Osama bin Laden. Yeah. And back before 9/11, he had a few hundred followers, and he'd been committing attacks throughout the 90s against the West and was talking about the Great Satan, Iran's great way of describing. But he was a what he would have described as a freedom fighter trying to kick the Russians out of Afghanistan. That's where he went to learn his trade. Once he had done that, I think we thought we were, America, the West, was funding Osama bin Laden then to help kick the Russians out of Afghanistan. When he turned and said, right, I want you all out of my countries, and he turned against the West, I think we were slow to realise just what a threat that was. Yeah, and therefore very slow to see 9/11 developing and 9/11 happen. And there's the 9/11 Commission report is very long, but it's worth reading about how many different agencies could get it so wrong. Partly because, and this is me saying this, they failed to spot the threat of one brown man in a cave. The US intelligence community, incredibly bright Ivy League university people, all white, all failing to understand how this one man who's wearing robes and is hiding out in the caves in Afghanistan, how could that person influence so many people worldwide? Well, of course, he's echoing Muhammad. And if you understood the religion, you would understand what a calling that was for a lot of very vulnerable people. And this is the key. Why were they vulnerable? Why were they susceptible to this message that somehow the West was at war with their religion? Why were they susceptible to that? I still don't think we've got our heads around how severe a problem that is.
Do you think, massive geopolitical events and, world wars and the Iraq War, do you think that plays a role?
I don't think it. I know it because I was in there dealing with it. So whenever there's an international event, so 9/11, the reaction to 9/11 was exactly the reaction I wanted. So I'm not being some kind of super woke person on this particular issue. It was exactly we wanted to strike back hard. We had been attacked. The West had been attacked. It was America's worst atrocity on American soil. It was a complete wake-up call for them. But the level of reaction, in Afghanistan was enough to galvanize what was a few hundred Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden supporters into tens of thousands. Yeah. And then Iraq, which I think hindsight, we all now know, Iraq was a huge mistake. The weapons of mass destruction dossier, the weapons of mass destruction that never existed. It turned what was a just war in Afghanistan into an unjust war in Iraq, and therefore radicalized tens of thousands of more Islamist fundamentalists who said, well, hang on, you told me bin Laden, Rashid Rauf, these people, you told me that the West wanted to kill us and kill our religion, and we've kind of proved that. Every time one of those geopolitical events happens, we see more activity back here on British soil.
Is there not a certain amount of overthinking in that, though? So surely...
You're accusing me of overthinking. Yeah. You may be one of very few friends I know who do that.
I'm playing devil's advocate, Neil. Okay. So surely someone who is willing to blow themselves up to murder people as a terrorist, do they really care about the ins and outs of geopolitical events?
No, so we're talking about two different people here. Okay. We're talking about the people who do the radicalisation. These are smart people. So these are not people who've been downtrodden in society. Osama bin Laden came from a billionaire's family. Some of these people are highly educated and they understand what they're doing. They're charismatic, they're good speakers, they're good propagandists, they make good journalism, they make good Hollywood-style movies about their narrative, about what this utopia they're preaching is and what this martyrdom that we're asking you to give up your life will do. We in the West have been really bad at countering that narrative because it is aimed at people who, you're right, they don't really know a lot about geopolitical events. Most of them would probably have never read the Quran and will be quite happy that somebody who is twisting the words of the Quran to suit their particular agenda. These are very vulnerable, malleable, easily influenced people. sometimes we're seeing them get much younger. I heard Ken McCallum say, I think it was a third of people
Ken
arrested
McCallum,
last year.
the MI5 director.
Yep, the MI5 Director General, good friend of mine. We worked together throughout all the sort of atrocities from 2015 onwards in counter-terrorism. He was saying he gives an annual statement, and I think I'm absolutely positive he said 30% of the people arrested last year were under 18.
Yeah. I think it's more, actually.
Yeah, well, this is horrific.
Yeah.
I saw this trend happening while I was there. But basically, these radicalisers need to get somebody as the tip of the spear. They need to get somebody who's prepared to blow themselves up, prepared to attack civilians, prepared to take the lives of innocent people.
Yeah.
They have to influence those people. We talked about gangs in one of our early episodes, and we talked about these people needing to find family, needing to find purpose, needing to find a life.
Yeah.
And remember I said we've got streets in this country where half the kids joined a gang and the other half became terrorists.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason they were doing that was for one simple reason. No adult responsible
sense
role
of
model.
belonging.
Yeah, no sense
Being
of belonging.
part of something.
No purpose.
Do you know what I'm fascinated by? Extremism is always changing. Back then in 2005, the biggest threat by far was Islamist extremism. Still is. But the fastest growing is extreme far-right neo-Nazi groups, and also you've got the huge problem of foreign state threats.
Yeah.
Are you worried about this?
Massively worried. And when I left, it was interesting because I dealt with the Salisbury poisonings alongside the intelligence agencies and the government, and we thought we'd done a brilliant job there. And I've always said, I thought that wasn't a botched assassination attempt of the Skripals in Salisbury, and we've seen that there'll be a lot more on that as the inquiry concludes. But it was basically a way of Russia saying, I can reach into, whenever I want, I can reach into your soil and kill a dissident, attack a dissident. And we've just seen, in fact, this week, my friend Dominic Murphy, the head of counter-terrorism in London, has just announced the first 5 people who are arrested and 3 convicted under the National Security Act who are Russian proxies targeting a Russian dissident here. So as well as that, you've got cyber threat, you've got disinformation being spread by those foreign states. I didn't have to deal with that in my time. In 2018, it was a big wake-up call that there was this hostile state threat. By the time I had retired in 2023, I think Matt Jukes, my successor, was seeing a big, steady uptick in the number of foreign state threats on our soil. Yeah. Everything from sabotage to espionage to plotted assassinations of dissidents on our soil. That is incredibly dangerous. The one thing I did think I spent a lot of my time raising the ante on was the extreme right-wing threat, which you have both covered very impressively as a journalist. And I struggled to convince both MI5, who didn't have anything to do with it in 2017 after the Finsbury Park mosque attacker, who was an extreme right-wing. And of course we'd had Thomas Mayer, who murdered Joe Cox
the year
before in 2016, all of which led to National Action being prescribed, National Action being the first extreme right-wing terrorist group in this country since the 1930s. To be targeted and prescribed, and we broke that particular organisation.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the first in a long line of far-right neo-Nazi groups.
Yeah, so I mean, we talked about the fastest growing threat being the extreme right wing, and I was always misquoted on this point. So my point was always that
journalists misquoting. I won't have that.
Well, they were misquoting for a reason, because I think what they were trying to say is that we had taken our eye off the ball, and that I was, you should stop looking at extreme right-wing threat because it doesn't really exist. You should be looking at the Islamist threat. I was always very clear that the Islamist threat was always the bulk of my work. It was the volume. It was about 80% of the workload. But this extreme right-wing threat, a lot of it inspired by the terrorism of the Islamist jihadist mentality, was rising at a much higher rate, and we were having to intervene in those plots as well. And I think that's the case today. So I've heard my successors talk about it being over 20% of the casework. A lot of the people are being arrested and referred into Prevent. We have the Prevent review saying you're spending too much time on right-wing and not enough on Islamist. But it's still a massive problem. And then, as you've quite rightly said, on top of that, you've got another huge bulk of operations which are about state threat now.
Yeah.
So all of this needs to be funded. All of this needs to be done. But one of the biggest problems they've got is this group of people they call mixed, unstable, unclear, which is a group of potential terrorists who don't actually have an ideology.
They don't have a home.
No.
Their extremist views.
They're looking for an excuse to commit violence. So I don't even think they're terrorists. I don't think they're interested in.
Are you talking
terrorism.
about people like the Nottingham attack and the stop?
Well, I'm not sure. Violent people have always committed violent offences, and then some people have got sort of very disturbed backgrounds. Some people are mentally ill. Some people. We need to stop conflating those with people who are committing terrorism for a political, sociological, ideological reason. But these are not people who are committing a terrorist attack to support a cause. They're trying to find a cause to excuse their violence. Yeah. That's very different and pretty sociopathic.
Yeah. Neil, I just wonder, what lesson should have been learned from 7/7 that hasn't been?
Well, I think one of the things that successive governments have failed to do is to have any kind of counter-extremism strategy that would help support things like Prevent. We didn't support the Prevent strategy of the government's contest pillar. Prevent was a sort of pre-criminal space. You know, you had to volunteer to go into Prevent. You had to know that you were going down the wrong path and ask for help, or somebody who loved you had to, refer you into Prevent. We've slated that. We clumsily introduced it. We've allowed radicalisers to slag off Prevent. The government haven't supported their own strategy with either money or with tough talk from the top saying it's one of the most important pillars. And they really didn't support it by having a very clear counter-extremism policy. And the reason the counter-extremism policy for me would have been creating some kind of society resilience. I want to get Dame Sarah Khan on to talk to us about this perhaps later on in the year. She's going to give some evidence to a parliamentary committee on it. We're all trying to work together to advise the government they've got to have a proper counter-extremism strategy. How do you define what extremism is? How do you legislate for it so law enforcement can do something about it? We don't have those clear boundaries, so law enforcement can do very little about it. You have a lot of harmful stuff, mostly delivered these days through social media, which might be lawful but is incredibly harmful. What do we do as a society with that? And how do we stop not just young people, adults, who are incredibly impressionable, being drawn into conspiracy theory, myths and disinformation? How do we stop that happening so that they don't become the tip of the spear for the radicaliser? And we haven't learnt the lessons of how those boys were so easily radicalised back in 2005, in my view.
It's still happening.
Yes.
So that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening to The Crime Agents. Make sure you've subscribed on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
We'll be back with another main episode next Wednesday, and we'll have a bonus episode for you on Friday. Remember, if you have any questions for us, either about our real-life experiences or anything in the news, then please send them in and we'll answer them in a bonus episode soon.
And you can send them by email to thecrimeagents@global.com or follow us on social media. We're at The Crime Agents on all major platforms, and you can leave a question there. That's it from me. Goodbye.
And goodbye from me.